Everything you have learned so far assumes the gap is in you. The expression gap is about your visibility. The authority gap is about your register. Both assume that the work is on the individual. The third gap asks a different question entirely. What if the feedback is not about your behavior at all? What if it is about this organization's definition of what executive looks like? Everything you have learned so far assumes the gap is in you. The expression gap is about your visibility. The authority gap is about your register. Both assume that the work is on the individual. The third gap asks a different question entirely. What if the feedback is not about your behavior at all? What if it is about this organization's definition of what executive looks like? The leader whose style worked in one environment but reads as lacking presence in a different organizational culture. Same person, same behaviors, different verdict. 360-degree data from these leaders shows a distinctive pattern. Ratings split along subcultural lines, not behavioral consistency lines. Former colleagues rate them highly. New stakeholders flag deficiencies. The leader did not change. The audience changed. And the feedback reflects the audience's template for what executive means, not the leader's actual behavior. A chief marketing officer built her reputation at a startup known for fast, transparent communication. Speed was valued. Directness was rewarded. In her new role at a Fortune 100, her first quarterly business review generates the feedback, "She is too blunt. She does not read the room." Her 360 data splits cleanly. Former startup colleagues rate her presence at 4.5. The new executive team rates her at 2.8. The ratings do not reflect inconsistent behavior. They reflect the same behavior evaluated against two different definitions of what executive looks like. Her directness was an asset at the startup. It is a friction point at the Fortune 100. Before coaching this leader on her communication style, the first question is whether the feedback is about her behavior or about the company's implicit definition of what executive looks like. That is the organizational audit, and it comes before the coaching plan. Most presence programs start with the individual. They assume the gap is personal. An assessment-driven approach starts with the system, because coaching a leader for a systemic problem does not close the gap. It just produces a frustrated leader who has been told to change for reasons that have nothing to do with her capability. Pull up your most recent 360 results if you have them. Where do self-ratings and stakeholder ratings diverge by more than a point? Now look at the split differently. Do the ratings diverge consistently across all raters, or do they split by audience group? Consistent divergence points to expression or authority. Split by audience points to context. Which pattern do you see? Beyond your own data, three signals suggest the presence problem may be systemic. First, the feedback language is vague and circular. You just do not have it. No behavioral specifics. Second, multiple leaders from underrepresented groups receive similar presence feedback within the same organization. Third, the organization's definition of executive maps narrowly to a specific cultural or communication style. An honest word about where coaching's limitations sit with this gap type. Coaching can sharpen a leader's ability to read and adapt to organizational norms. It can build the skill of style switching across audiences. Coaching does not make organizational culture more inclusive. That sentence matters, because when the audit reveals a narrow cultural template that systematically disadvantages certain leaders, coaching the individual is the wrong lever. The intervention needs to match the level of the problem. Consider an HR director who notices that 3 women promoted to VP in the last 2 years have all received similar presence feedback, not assertive enough, does not command the room. Yet all three led successful teams and delivered strong results. The feedback language is vague and circular. The pattern maps to a narrow organizational definition of what executive looks like. The definition privileges a specific communication style. Sometimes the right recommendation is not coaching the leader, but a conversation with the CHRO about what the organization is rewarding and whether that definition is creating a systemic gap. That takes courage, and it takes data. In plain language style context mismatch. The coaching approach for this gap starts with organizational mapping, not individual behavior change. When the work IS individual, when the leader genuinely needs to expand their range for a new context, it is repertoire expansion. Reading what this context calls executive and adding it to the leader's behavioral range, not changing personality, not performing someone else's style, developing the range to deliver what the context needs without losing what makes the leader effective. You can see how the context gap differs from the other two. The question now is, how do you read it in your own data? The signals are specific, and they look different from what you saw with expression and authority. That is where we are going next.